It started out with an idea to make a documentary.
Now, with over 60 interviews completed and more to record, it's time to listen fully.
These are the stories from those who experienced the Young Religious Unitarian Universalist program. Hello and welcome to episode 16. I'm Naomi Cooker.
And I'm Lindsay Cattle-LaPointe. We have officially made it through our first season of the podcast.
Ooh, where's the clap track?
Oh.
Amazing. And what better person to end on than Ayanna Kafi Lobe? We visited them at their home in Atlanta, Georgia with their partner, Chris.
Following the interview, we had a YRUU dinner where folks came to chat, share food, and there may have been a little singing.
There was some singing.
There was.
We also wrote affirmations on taped pieces of paper on each other's backs. That's a practice that the youth did during their YRUU conferences.
We sure did, and I still have mine.
I've got mine too.
Interviewing Ayanna was so refreshing. They brought in the perspective of someone who really focused on their local and district youth group, proving that having a strong national youth support can trickle down to the local communities seamlessly.
So my name is Ayanna Kafi, sometimes Stringer, sometimes Lobe, depending on what part of my life you know me in. But for work, I always go by Ayanna Kafi. I was in YRUU in the early 2000s in Atlanta, right where we are now. I grew up UU and definitely grew up in Southern UUism. I started my journey at the Thurman Hamer Ellington UU Church, which was a tiny, tiny church that was incredibly diverse and very, very Black. So I had a very skewed view of what UUism was in my 90s UU life. I thought it was all potlucks and aunties and, oh God, so this is a little bit of a deep cut, but our choir was a drum choir. So we actually had our choir perform in the Atlanta Olympics. So that's cool. My dad was one of the gold rings. So if you go on YouTube and you just look at the opening ceremonies, there we are, part of little known UU history. I met the love of my life in YRUU space. I grew up to be a religious professional. I work at the UUA now. I've served 2 congregations as well as been on boards / steering committees of a couple of UU organizations. This is really where my home is and a lot of my life. I have a 16-year-old who started working at the UUA before me. They were on youth staff for GA. And now they are involved in the ongoing national virtual youth group. Very proud parent. And welcome to my little cottage in the woods. This is where me and my partner go to retreat and where I also work from home. My early life, I had no religious education, no Sunday school, none of that. It was everything was multi-generational. The services, board meetings, everything was completely multi-gen, which now that I'm saying that is incredible and mind-blowing. I don't know how they did that. I don't know how they kept me entertained. So our church made a decision to disband and join the largest congregation here in Atlanta, which is UUCA, the UU Congregation of Atlanta. So there were religious education classes for every age and stage, which was bizarre. It was like stepping onto the moon. And the minister at the time he's such an intellectual. He's a scholar, like he's incredible thinker. But, at maybe 13, like it was so far over my head. So I definitely went straight into Sunday school. Back then, there were 2 services, and they would do the Sunday school portion at the first service, and then they do something that was a little bit more fun, more extracurricular-y during the second portion. And that was really cemented when I became a high schooler and went into YRUU. So we had Sunday school at the beginning, YRUU at the second hour, and there was maybe 30 minutes between, which was definitely when people, not me, would spend their time getting into trouble and doing various shenanigans. I never shenaniganed. So Sunday school was, and for any religious educators out there, they know it's, you're just throwing things at the youth and seeing what sticks. So we did, practically every curriculum imaginable. My DRE, Pat Kahn, was incredible at grabbing resources and, just finding different things to throw at us. We were never bored unless we intended to be. YRUU was something completely different. It was definitely centered on our experience. We did check-ins that sometimes lasted the entire time, sometimes were just a bit of it, and then really intense conversations. I remember the epic "Is God real?" debates. There might have only been 5 of us in the room, but it got so heated. Because, coming into any small group of UUs is walking into a massive amount of religious traditions and family traditions and religious trauma and all kinds of stuff that's just sitting, lying in wait. I think that's something unique about UUism, is that, we're all from somewhere completely different. We're all coming from completely different vantage points. And it was also isolating in a way that I don't think that people realized I was experiencing. I was definitely the only youth of color. And I went to private school all the way through. I had strategies for feeling at home in my culture, my identities, that I just don't think that my youth group buddies knew that I had. And I kind of assumed that everyone had a home life or like a home culture. I don't know. I just didn't understand that youth were feeling like, no, this is exactly perfectly embodying what I need culturally. But I do know people like that, and we've had that weird discussion as adults. I mean, from an early age, I always felt like I was leaving something at home culturally. I went to private school in like the middle of Atlanta, and it was mostly doctors and lawyers' kids, CDC scientists' kids, people like that, just because of the location. So by the time I was in high school, by the time I was in YRUU, I was well practiced in that. I never came and did like a presentation on Kwanzaa to my YRUU group. I was just like, nope, it's Kwanzaa. And I mean, still to this day, I say I don't teach on my culture for free. And it's a bit of a boundary. I would, of course, for like friends or things like that, but I don't feel like it's like a duty or an imperative to be completely understood. It's not a drive within me. So if I have my church best friend, we have nothing in common culturally, but we have something so deeply and profoundly in common ethically, morally, spiritually. And so we're going through that together, and that's so important. And they're not coming and teaching me about Christmas. I just had my first Christmas and mind blown. I didn't understand how this went. So I think that I was doing the same as everyone. It's just folks of the dominant culture don't understand that their cultural stuff isn't necessarily understood too. So there's that weird experience being very visibly Black in a room full of white people, and then all of a sudden we're bringing in a cultural lens. And all eyes start to turn toward me as if I'm going to somehow educate on this. And of course, at like 16, there's no way I would have been at all qualified to speak on cultural appropriation or what lens we should be looking through or how we should be moving as a faith and what our future looks like and what the dream of UUism is. I was a social activist. I wanted to be front lines in protests. I wanted to be making moves that were big and splashy and like very of the moment. I wasn't interested in teaching. which is age appropriate. That's the stage I was going through. And, you know, there's a direct line between baby Ayanna and today Ayanna. I mean, I think I am who they wanted to be talking to. I am now who they wanted then. But I do credit myself for not giving in to the pressure to be an expert. While we are all experts on our own experiences, you know, it takes a lot of work, a lot of study, a lot of self-care to be nuanced enough to be even having those conversations in a way that is productive. And I think that I could have done a lot of harm if I were, you know, speaking for the culture as the one youth of color. Because I know me, and I know that I didn't have the nuance. I know that I was in a deep struggle to figure myself out. You know, I went undiagnosed neurodivergence until maybe 2020. So there was a lot going on inside of me, and I wasn't ready to be having that kind of conversation in a way that they might have wanted me to. I mean, I remember going to, I think it was called leadership school at the Mountain, and it was all social justice themed, and like the culmination project was getting on top of a literal soapbox. We are a theatrical people. So getting on top of a literal soapbox in the middle of the dining hall where adults from various other retreats are eating and giving a soapbox talk. And I just remember there being like this push for me to talk about racial things. And I would never hide the fact that I had a pretty privileged upbringing, at least financially. So a lot of the problems that are equated to race are actually equated to income, or are actually from income, because I spent the early part of my career as a teacher, so I know the difference now. So I did do my soapbox talk about race, but it just felt a little reaching. Because I think my earliest experiences were so racially joy-filled in a way that UUism wasn't ready to embrace in the early 2000s, but is now, definitely. I mean, Kwanzaa was always celebratory. Juneteenth was always celebratory. When I go to see exhibits about the African diaspora, it always moves something in me about resilience, and it feels in part uplifting. So I wasn't there. I'm so glad that the general thoughts about race make room to center Black joy now, because I feel like I have a lot of it, and that's really where I guess my ministry around people of color is centered, is coming from a place where I'm embodying my Black joy and using that as a tool for resilience. And that just wasn't the conversation in the early 2000s. It was it was about how are we harming people? How are we doing wrong? And it was from what I saw, it created, I think, unnecessary panic in a lot of my white beloveds. I like to talk about racial issues in a way that's fun. Learning should be fun. When I hear about situations like these really intense, militarized rehabilitation programs, you know, it makes me want to go back to being a DRE. Like, I want to, that's how I got started as a DRE in the first place, is my desire to give kids what I had. Because I had basically what the point was. I had just a special moment where we were all super close, yet super inclusive. And we were going on cool trips. We were going to youth cons. We were going to the mountain cons. We were having our own lock-ins. We were making changes in our congregation. We were starting to branch out and do different work with different congregational committees. If I would have had, 10 years in YRUU instead of the 4, I would have probably started going to General Assembly and things like that. And it was so nurturing. I know that some people have different experiences than that, and I think that's awful, because to me there's such a simple formula. All the programming has to be centered on the kids that are there, the youth that are there. It can't be about the DRE's personal agenda, because we all want to push them toward, what we think is the best path. It has to be about the youth that show up. Center who's in the room. It's all there is to it. When I was pandemic DREing, I was literally throwing everything I could think of at them. I had someone I know come in to run role-playing games virtually. I had someone come in to teach different needle crafts. So we were crocheting and knitting and embroidering. We had Wednesday night kickbacks, so we would just get on Zoom, do a little project, eat dinner, and just hang out. We were doing pagan rituals around the wheel of the year. We were, doing manifestation. We were going on virtual trips to other congregations to see what UUism is like in different contexts. which was very fun to me. So I was doing anything I could to keep them engaged and give them a space of low stress and a space that wasn't goal-oriented, a space that was experientially oriented. And that's what I got. That's the beauty of my YRUU experience, was that I had a DRE who found out that I liked writing. She was a youth coordinator, who found out that I was really into writing, and she was like, "Oh, well, we're starting a newsletter. You're in charge." Just to give me a space to put my voice out there. We went to go see Hedwig and the Angry Inch in theaters because she found out that youth group can be a pretty queer space, in my experience. We went on so many interesting, weird trips just because we've never been there and we want to see more of the world we're in. We want to learn more. It was a really special time, and I'll probably say this to anyone who gives me enough time to talk. I got lucky. I was in the sweet spot of the early 2000s. There's nothing else in my life like it. Walk into a room that we are together in, and this could be not even in our congregation. This could be in Waffle House. This could be anywhere. And we would all choose the largest, most comfortable space to all be on. Everyone. I have a picture that I was tagged in from Facebook from my Ascender years. Ascender is a program at the Mountain. It's before counselor in training. It's just kind of like a work summer program. That's where I learned how to cook. So there were maybe 12 of us, and we had a couch this big, and we were just all on it. And I am on someone's lap, just, and that was so normal. We would all get on someone's bed, and just, that's where we're having our little chat. We were so physical with each other in such a comfortable way. These are the first people I held hands with, platonic hand holding, and, laying my head on my best friend's shoulder. And these are the first people that I was really, really actively huggy with. We would be having check-ins during YRUU, and you'd be sitting next to your best friend, because of course, and they'd be sharing from deep in their heart, completely unprompted. It's just what's been weighing on them, and then all of a sudden there are 5 of you just embracing this person as they're sharing. Someone's like halfway over the edge of the couch. We're just all like, yes, please tell us more, friend. It was a little bonkers how comfortable we were being this close. I wouldn't have it any other way. This is where I learned to love. It's as simple as that. This is where I learned how to genuinely care for people in my community. sometimes it's as simple as scooting a little closer. A couple weeks ago, a beloved friend of mine, it invited me to be on the LGBTQ panel for Junior High OWL. And I only knew one other person on the panel because we had worked together. And so I was like a little nervous, a little butterfly-y, because junior hires are harsh critics. And so, the youth all file in. There may be like 15 of them. Like it's a substantial class, and they're all sitting like this far apart. They all just have their little chairs and their space, and they are, beautifully respecting each other's bodies and personal spaces, but no one's even whispering with each other. And I don't know, like OWL is a curriculum that brings up thoughts. You want to whisper something to your friend. Sex ed is funny. You want to giggle with someone. And it just was quiet and respectful in a way that I would really appreciate if I was going to speak at like a school assembly. But I just know that these 15 or so youth don't get what I got. They don't get to just throw themselves in a cuddle puddle with all of their new and old friends. I mean, I know that I've, at youth cons, slept right next to and whispered all night with a person that I met hours before. And it worked. That was the culture. The culture was so physically lovey. And I remember that I never left one of my friends without telling them I loved them. And that's not something that I have in my adult UU life. I mean, I do tell people I love them, I think a little bit more than people are expecting. But I do. And, at some point it's going to be the last time that I talk to everyone. So I think it's cool if I said that I loved them the last time. I really regret not being able to give that sense of closeness to my kid. But my kid is a don't touch me kid. I get maybe 2 hugs a week, and I'm thankful for what I get. But it was also the emotional closeness. It wasn't about the physicality. The physicality was the response to how deeply we felt connected. I had a really heartbreaking friend breakup a couple years back with someone who I grew up with in YRUU. And she said to me, since when do we not talk about things? And that really struck me. Looking back, I love that her core truth is that we always said what was on our minds. We always said what was on our hearts. And that was, the foundation of our bond and the community we were in.
Working on YRUU made one thing clear to me. Being in community is how we not only survive, but how we thrive as humans. The Young Religious Unitarian Universalist program is an example of why belonging is so fundamental to building community. Your support keeps our important conversation about the work out there and going. Please go to yruu.org/donate to give what you can, and thank you so much.
There was at least in the Mid-South District, there was a strong tradition of sharing the knowledge. So it was, kind of frowned upon, thought of as kind of shameful to leave without sharing something, to leave the group without sharing something, because everyone ages out, of course, but you leave a piece of what made it amazing for you behind, so that people have an opportunity to recreate. And former youth stayed in contact. I had a couple of former youth friends who would just check on me every now and then, give me advice, tell me stories from back when they were doing the thing. So there was just always this educational loop. And I got a lot from that, from the traditional mentorship of people just listening to where you're at and giving notes. So there's that. And in the spaces I was in, there was always a couple of really type A people, me included, kind of like the bylaws nerds, people who are yeah, let's sit down for our 3-hour bylaws editing session. So there was always the infrastructure of the rules, the covenant, the process of how to work through the conflicts that we were bound to have. So that is one of the ways that it was kind of safe to be so physically free with each other, because I would have never done that at school. But when I brought my school friends in to YRUU space, it felt easy for them to come into an environment like that, because there was the infrastructure. And I think my first experience with event planning, with how you curate an experience, was through YRUU District Con creation and Mountain Con creation. There has to be a certain flow to things, and there has to be a certain mix of the light with the heavy, the spiritual with the trivial. It all has to come together if it's going to be in a youth space. In adult UU spaces, we can just sit with the heavy and then off we go into our lives. And, we don't necessarily need to have a snack break afterwards. We can generally handle our own needs. If we need to go cry in a parking lot, that's what we're going to go do. If we need to go treat ourselves to a milkshake, that's what we're going to go do. But, in youth event creation, you have to think of all the things, because you don't know what their life is outside of that. You can't give homework. You can't say, okay, take care of yourself. Everyone do a self-care after this. Because you don't know if they're going straight from this to go visit their great aunt, or whatever their parents have planned. And you also have to bring in the traditions. There are so many rich traditions, like the Big Four, which are, the unspeakable things, the things you do and you're out. So that's, and my group, we always did it cutesy. It's X on sex, hugs not drugs, silence the violence, and no schlepping the weapons. I don't know who came up with that. I love them, whoever that was. But, we had to bring that in, obviously. And then there were the smaller rules, like lots of talk about inclusivity and what that means. Like, everyone needs to embrace everyone in the group as part of the group, and everyone processes in different ways, and so people get to just be off on their own, and people get to lead from the front of the room, and some people get to just want to fold the pamphlets. And so like every contribution is honored as vital to the whole. And there has to be some spiritual grounding. We lean a lot on chalice lighting because that is the easiest and most accessible spiritual grounding moment. And it might just be lighting the chalice, doing your little quick reading, and then you're off to announcements. Or it could be that we're going to spend time, passing the energy bubble. So for those who have not passed the energy bubble, someone creates energy in their hands and they get it nice until they feel it. They really feel the heft of it, and then they pass it to the next person to play with, and it goes all around the circle in the group. People are into it at various levels. And then at the end, you have passed around a ball of your intention, of your energy, and it has touched everyone in the group, making the group, energetically whole for a moment. So that was definitely one of the traditions that was brought into my space, and who knows where it originated, what group it sprung from, and I hope some group out there is still doing that. So the spiritual grounding was important. Food is vital. I say to my kid that if you want to gather young people, you have to gather around food. Because it's this time of your life where you have all of the know-how to have autonomy, but you don't have full autonomy. So, you don't control what's in your refrigerator at home. You can ask, you can influence, but you don't control. And so it's just like such a small gesture to provide something for the group, to say, this is food that is centered on your food interests. This is not centered on physical health and all of that. We brought gummy bears because you like gummy bears. And that is feeding something that's also very important, the emotional hunger. I used to like to bake for my youth, and I'm sure one or two appreciated it, but I wanted them to know that I was thinking of them while I was not with them, and they matter enough to me to throw something in the oven and, wrap it up and bring it to them. That the time we have together is special and sacred and worth making a bit of a fuss over. And I think that teenagers don't really get fussed about in that kind of way enough. We fuss about our friends. We have our little dinner parties and get really excited about having people over, and we make sure we make the most delicious things. But when you're going to go see a bunch of teenagers, I think that that's equally fuss-worthy. There's, I have this memory of the first con that I ever crafted. That's actually where I met my husband. So there was a syrup chugging contest. I had bought this syrup for our pancake breakfast. I'm the type A type. I had brought enough options, and the youth were like, there is a cornucopia of food. Let's find a way to express what we need to express through the consumption of this food. It still makes me cringe. I'm glad it was on the first night and the youth didn't go home to their parents after having that much sugar in their system. But I don't know. I feel like food is a, really treasured and sacred part of a youth event. It was definitely a first learning experience with letting things go, creating your perfect plan and then letting things just kind of fall where they need to fall. Because now when I look back at the syrup chugging contest, disgusting. But also, I have this memory that I get to share with all of these people that I'm not even in contact with anymore. But, I still love those kids dearly, and wish them well. I hope that they're eating a regular amount of sugar wherever they are. I crafted that conference down to the minute. So I alarmed, furious, frazzled. But I did stop myself from jumping in. We had plenty of youth advisors who were just kind of grimacing, and I was like, you know what? This part is not my job. It's not all my job. I've talked to other former youth of color, And a lot of us say, oh yeah, my parents wouldn't let me do that. I wasn't going all the way out there or anything like that. My parents were definitely, I wouldn't necessarily say stricter because they weren't strict, but there were different expectations. So I could go to mountain camp, I could go to mountain cons because my dad was on the mountain board. That was super cool. He just like had his little spies. He actually would get emails from the mountain programs director, like email updates the summer that I was there, I think 7 weeks out of the summer, which is a long time for your 17-year-old to be gone. But I think she was sending him weekly updates. She would like go around and like snap pictures and send him like little things. Which is fine, I guess, but I definitely stayed a little closer to home. I stayed in spaces that my parents had access to me. Because at the mountain, this is actually my favorite disability story. My knee went out for the very first time at mountain camp at 17. And I was not an athlete. So my knee, if it was a well knee, it would not have gone out. So I was at the bottom of the mountain. We're playing Capture the Flag all through the forest. I have the flag, non-athlete Ayanna. I'm running. And this boy who was like, he looked to be like the size of a building. He was like 6 foot. He was running after me. And I'm booking it. And then my knee, it just goes out from under me. I hit the soft ground of the bottom of the mountain. And this poor boy, this poor building-sized boy felt horrible. He thought he had done something. So he scoops me up and carries me across the Capture the Flag line. And I do a little to one of my teammates. We won. And he carried me over to where the counselors were. He's like, I don't know what I did. It's a connective tissue thing. But the next day, one of the people who ran the mountain loaded me in his truck, took me to his doctor because my dad had called and asked. And he, my dad sent him our insurance information and was like, just charge it. I will pay you whatever, whenever, it's fine. And, he waited with me. He took me to the pharmacy. He got me all set up. He brought me ace bandages from his house. And of course, kids get taken care of with equal love at the mountain when they get hurt. But my dad wanted the extra touch. He wanted to make sure that I was taken care of, in a personal way. So there was no way I was going to GA all willy-nilly. There was no way I was doing national leadership. And I feel the same way now that I'm a parent of a youth. I don't let my kid just go anywhere. My kid is involved in national stuff because I'm involved in national stuff. My kid gets to work on the youth staff at GA because I was going anyway. The Jenica, the leader of YUP, the young oh my gosh, I can't believe I used an acronym without remembering what it stands for. It's the UUA's National Youth Group. Young UU Project. Jenica is a beloved colleague of mine, and she is very communicative about things that are going on and any problems I should look out for. So I feel so comfortable. And now as a parent, I get it. I'm way more protective because I know what these UU streets are like. I was in them when I was a teenager. Oh my God, the first time I got slurred was in a UU youth space. Right after we went to the Civil Rights Museum in Alabama. It was a really heavy day for me. But that was also the day that I became the social action coordinator of the Mid-South District, the YAC, the Youth Adult Committee. Council? Probably council. So I know the good and the bad. I know the types of things that can happen. I know the harm and the joy. And I just prefer to be as protective as my parents were.
Hi everyone, it's Lindsay. I wanted to jump in here to tell you that we are having a Con-inspired connective retreat November 20th to the 22nd on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. This is co-directed by myself and Reverend Jason Leiden, with our weekend musician Matt Meyer. Many of the people you will hear on this podcast plan to be in attendance and even help lead some of the activities. We are taking reservations now. When you head to our website, YRUU.org, click on Connective Retreat. It's time to connect. See you there.
I'm now coming to an understanding that I didn't communicate what I was doing in a way that really put the picture of what I was doing into my parents' head. So when I say that I wanted to be front lines at protests, I was. But I just don't think that my parents fully understood what was happening. And everything was fine. I was fine. Nothing bad happened. I just yelled a lot. But I mean, I understand, I come from a household with two parents that are working definitely more than 40 hours a week. I spent a lot of time at school. I spent a lot of time in my extracurriculars, so the time we had together was precious and finite, and a lot had to get communicated in that time, and that time was generally when we were at our worsts during the day. So, this is before dinner and through dinner. And then I have to go do my homework. My dad has to get back on his computer to do more work, things like that. So there have been a lot of things that I've had to say, no, really, this is what I was doing. What I said with my words, that was accurate. Just because I said it in a nonchalant way doesn't mean you necessarily need to take it like that. But I'm the youngest, and so I think that they were trying to be a little bit more chill. They never really said that I couldn't go places. Yeah, I can't think of a single place they aside from you're not going all over the United States, just 'cause. So my favorite YRUU protest, YRUU group. We went to the School of America's protest. I think that was in 2002. Yeah, when we found out about it, we were like, oh, no, absolutely not. And, we built an entire youth con around it. We brought in a speaker or two. We made our posters. And, yeah, we spent the entire Saturday of the con at the School of Americas doing the protest. It was a little bit more like a festival than I would have preferred, because people were like selling t-shirts. There might have been like funnel cake. Like, people were also definitely vending. But the folks, once you got past that and like up toward where the crowd was really gathering, it was just like any other protest. It definitely didn't do anything groundbreaking externally, but I'm sure that it radicalized a few of the youth.
What was actually it that the School of Americas were doing, that you were protesting?
So the School of Americas was this long-standing educational program that taught police and military of other countries, specifically Central and South America, really awful tactics. There were torture books that they used in the School of Americas. And I mean, as young, pretty radical UUs, we were appalled. I would also say a lot of us were pretty sheltered. What we heard on NPR was, very far from us. And this was something happening so physically close to us. I mean, this was happening within our district. This is something that was impacting all of us. And lending our voices, showing that young people genuinely care, was not too much for us to ask of ourselves and of our friends. We were definitely aware that there was a long-standing tradition of people crossing the line, intentionally getting arrested, and doing that as an act of solidarity to the cause. It was one of the non-negotiables of the con covenant that none of us would be doing that. Signs, yelling, protest chants, all of that, A-okay, but no one was getting arrested. I mean, there's a time and a place, and when parents have given over watching of their children to beloved adults, that is not the time or place. You know, our advisors were incredible and we wanted to keep them. We wanted to keep those relationships. That was another thing that was incredible about my youth experience. We had such a incredible group of advisors who were integral. I still am very close with a woman who drove me all around the Mid-South District. Her kids were not involved in the yak stuff at all, but she would always come and take me to different events. And, you know, if I had gotten myself arrested, she would have had to find a new way to experience her call to serve UUism. Because that wouldn't have stood. I mean, I know being a DRE, I would have been like, okay, well, new advisors. As simple as that. Those relationships are vital. And I do fully support people making their own decisions about how they're going to show up for the causes. And we have a long tradition of ministers putting on the collars and going and allowing themselves to be arrested as a statement. But that's just not what the youth need to be doing at a con. At the congregation that my partner Chris was at, we were at neighboring congregations, very cute. They only had the single service, so he didn't get to do YRUU until he came over to my congregation. So they did the predecessor to YRUU, and then they switched to just doing OWL, which is Our Whole Lives, the incredible sex ed curriculum that goes from very, very young ages all the way to senior now. So we had, at my congregation, we had OWL as part of, sometimes we had it instead of the religious education block, and sometimes we had it as a other third thing. It's a long church day. So I think other places YRUU happened sooner. I know that some districts are a little slower to adopt, and some districts were early adopters. So, you know, I'm definitely thinking New England is up to the minute, but we were a bit slower here, and I think, you know, California is a little slower, just like proximity. And culture changes because of proximity. And Southern YRUU culture was, you know, slower and I think a little bit more flowy to what I perceive as the intensity of New England. I actually often would idolize the intensity and how much was going on in other districts. But, you know, now I really like the, I guess, molasses-esque way that we move through things here. There's a sweetness about the South, and that takes time to cultivate. I will speak for Atlanta UUism because I'm most plugged into what's happening on the ground here. I think that from the, I guess, kind of financial end of YRUU in the late 2000s, I think that we were still just kind of like, it's fine. You know, don't fix what's not broke. We weren't counting on funding anyway. I can do youth group in Walmart. I could do youth group in a van on a road trip. I can do youth group anywhere. It's not about, it's not about those kind of external factors. I think what YRUU gave a lot of us is a way to think about approaching young religious UUs. Some congregations now have never heard of YRUU, and that's totally fine. There's some youth out here who don't know that there have been a long line of approaches, each with their own cultures. But my experience coming into my life as a DRE, I came in at a time where a congregation was in a lot of change and shifting, and the minister, my boss, was a lifelong UU. She had gone through a similar YRUU experience as me, and so we had like a very easy way of communicating. She was also a DRE before she went to seminary. So she's like, let's bring back like the old template, like let's get back to basics, what we think of as basics, and just really focus on building this youth program up again, building the youth up personally, and doing for them what YRUU did for us. And that gave me license to kind of just go wild and, create a time and a certain time and place and a certain grounding. I think that that's one of the things that YRUU had, is a ability to create ground, create culture, wherever it was dropped. And that was really needed for the time and place we were in. It was a congregation who had sold its building and was moving into an office park. Like, it's full of tumult. And so we needed heavy duty community. Personally, I think that when YRUU dropped off, so did a lot of the information sharing and the mentorship you would get from former youth, and that sunset a lot of traditions. And that's unfortunate. We have spaces in wider UUism, where that kind of spirit is still alive and well, especially with boards. I think that we do boards really well, in the way that who came before you, the lineage, who you can contact about this thing I was reading about in minutes from 5 years ago. What all happened with that, where you can go. But I think that kind of feedback really led to the downfall of quite a few individual youth groups. And that's unfortunate, because youth deserve the world. They deserve everything we can give them. Yeah. And I think that if, I had just a magic wand, I would bring back some of the community that YRUU created, and just give it to every lonely youth in a congregation.
This podcast was produced by Linden Tree Productions. The interview was conducted by Lindsay Cattle LaPointe.
Music featured by Scott Murphy and Matt Meyer.
For more information, go to yruu.org. That's the question all spelled out. WHYAREYOUYOU.org.
Don't forget, our documentary, YRUU, is available to watch now by renting or buying it through Vimeo.
Please subscribe and review this podcast. It will really help more folks find this content.